I was running out of time, and that pressure was already eating into every decision I made. Tuition deadlines were close, my savings were gone, and I had reached the point where I stopped reading job descriptions carefully. Babysitting sounded simple enough, and I convinced myself that dealing with a baby could not possibly be worse than juggling classes and debt at the same time. That assumption stayed with me longer than it should have. The ad was short and oddly formal, which stood out compared to the usual chaotic posts. One child, private residence, good pay, discretion required. No photos, no extra details. I sent a message mostly out of habit, expecting nothing to come of it. The reply came minutes later, polite and cold, asking if I could come for an interview. The house was located in a quiet neighborhood that felt intentionally empty. The kind of place where people close their doors early and never ask questions. Standing outside, I noticed there were no toys in the yard, no signs of a child living there, and that absence stayed with me even before I stepped inside. I told myself not to overthink it. I rang the bell and waited longer than expected, using those seconds to remind myself that I could always leave if something felt off. That thought felt comforting at the time, even though it would prove meaningless later. Margaret opened the door and greeted me with a practiced calm that felt rehearsed rather than welcoming. Her movements were precise, and the house behind her looked clean in a way that lacked warmth. She didn't waste time on small talk and guided me straight into the living room, where she explained the job in a steady voice. Before she finished her explanation, my attention locked onto the oversized baby chair placed in the center of the room. It was reinforced, heavy, and clearly designed to restrain someone much larger than an infant. That detail unsettled me before I even understood why it existed. Then she introduced the baby, and my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. The figure sitting in the chair was a fully grown man, obese, balding, dressed in a diaper and a stretched onesie. His posture was wrong, his movements slow and awkward, and his eyes followed me with a dull curiosity that made my stomach tighten. I laughed without meaning to, assuming this had to be some kind of tasteless joke. Margaret's expression hardened immediately, and she corrected me with quiet irritation. She told me he was a baby and deserved to be treated like one. Her seriousness made the situation worse, not better. I left without arguing, my mind racing as I walked away. I spent the next week trying to forget what I had seen, but the money she offered kept returning to my thoughts, louder each time my bank balance dropped lower. When I returned a week later, I already felt like I was making a mistake, but desperation has a way of dulling instinct. Sitting in my car outside the house, I stayed there longer than necessary, gripping the steering wheel and debating whether I should still turn around. The silence of the street felt heavier than before, and it made the decision feel permanent. Margaret let me in without a surprise, as if she had been expecting my return. She repeated the rules with clinical detail, emphasizing routine and calm behavior. Her voice never wavered, and that consistency made it clear she saw nothing unusual about the situation. When she left, the house felt instantly larger and more oppressive. The man watched me from his chair without blinking for long stretches, his breathing loud and uneven. His legs kicked slowly, scraping against the plastic seat, producing a repetitive sound that drilled into my head. I kept my distance while preparing his food, constantly aware of how close I was to someone who should not have been there. Before feeding him, I paused, listened to the house and the faint noises he made. That moment stretched uncomfortably, filled with the expectation that something would go wrong even though nothing had happened yet. I fed him carefully, and he accepted the food without exaggerated enthusiasm, smearing it across his face and chest. As the hours passed, his behavior remained disturbingly consistent. He reacted to cartoons, laughed at colors, and cried when ignored. The longer I watched him, the more unsettling it became, because there was no sign of awareness behind his actions, only instinct and repetition. The tension escalated when he began to reach for me more often, his movements slow but deliberate. Each time his hand extended toward me, my body reacted before my thoughts could catch up, stepping back or shifting away. I told myself this was part of the job, but my heart rate never slowed. The first time he grabbed my sleeve, the strength of his grip caught me off guard. His fingers dug into the fabric, and he pulled with enough force to make me stumble. When I pulled away, he made a whining sound that quickly turned into loud adult crying that filled the room and echoed off the walls. I stood there frozen for a moment, not out of shock but out of calculation, trying to figure out how to calm someone who had the body of a man and the reaction of a child. I offered him a toy, maintaining distance while forcing my voice to stay soft and even. That tactic worked only briefly. He laughed, reached again, and this time aimed directly for my hand, attempting to pull it toward his mouth. His grip tightened, and I had to actively pull away, feeling his fingers resist before letting go. The laugh that followed was wet and pleased, and it made my skin crawl. From that moment on, I stayed constantly alert, measuring every movement and every step. The chair no longer felt like a barrier but a temporary delay, and I became acutely aware of how easily that restraint could fall if something went wrong. Bath time was unavoidable, and the anticipation of it weighed on me long before I entered the bathroom. I followed Margaret's notes carefully, checking the water temperature repeatedly, but my focus kept slipping back to the man standing up in that small space. That image refused to leave my head. As I unstrapped him and guided him toward the tub, the room felt tighter, as if the walls had moved closer. I lowered him into the water slowly, and the moment his skin made contact, his reaction was immediate and violent. He screamed with full force, the sound sharp and piercing. The water was too hot, and I realized it too late. He thrashed wildly, splashing water everywhere, and before I could correct the mistake, he stood up abruptly. His size filled the bathroom, and his movements were fast enough to knock me backward. He grabbed my face with both hands, his fingers pressing hard against my cheeks as he tried to force my mouth open. His strength overwhelmed me, and panic surged as I struggled to breathe properly. I kicked him in the stomach with everything I had, feeling the impact through my leg. He stumbled, slipped, and fell back into the tub, giving me just enough time to run. I grabbed a lamp from the hallway, holding it between us as a weak barrier. When he laughed, clapping his hands and moving toward me again, the sound was wrong in every way. I managed to distract him by knocking the lamp aside and retreating, locking myself into a room while my hands shook uncontrollably. I waited there, listening to the silence return slowly, terrified of the moment it might break. When I finally left the room, the house was quiet and he was back in his chair, strapped in and sucking on a bottle as if nothing had happened. That contrast made my head spin, and I struggled to reconcile what I had just survived with what I was now seeing. Margaret returned shortly after, and I tried to explain what happened without sounding hysterical. She listened calmly, checked the water heater, and assured me that he didn't understand pain or anger the way adults do. She framed the incident as a misunderstanding rather than a threat. She paid me more than agreed upon, placing the money in my hand without meeting my eyes. That action felt final, like a transaction meant to close the project entirely. I realized then that she had no intention of changing anything. I understood something important about that moment. He was not pretending, not playing a role. His reactions were real, driven by a mind locked in infancy, despite the body that housed it. I stayed. What can I say? I really needed the money. It's not like I felt safe, but understanding the rules made the fear manageable. Routine became my shield and distance became my survival strategy. I never made the same mistake twice, and I never let my guard down. The tension never disappeared. It lingered constantly, reminding me of how fragile the situation was and how easily it could collapse. I remained tired, alert, and painfully aware of my own vulnerability. I paid my tuition and finished the semester without telling anyone how I did it. And then I never went back to that place. I sometimes wonder if that woman got anyone else for that job. To be honest, I seriously doubt it, but who knows?
I had been babysitting for the Carter family for almost a year. Same house, same routine, same two girls. Their parents trusted me enough to leave without reminders or rules. They paid well, never checked cameras, never called unless they were late. That kind of trust doesn't happen fast. You earn it by showing up on time, smiling, and knowing when to stay quiet. The house was clean in a way that felt practiced, not obsessive. Toys were always put away, furniture stayed in the same places, and nothing felt fragile. It was easy to move through the rooms without thinking. That mattered because thinking too much leads to mistakes. I knew every step between the kitchen and the stairs. I knew which floorboard made noise and which door hinge needed oil. The girls were named Harper and Leela, 8 and 6. Blonde, thin, quiet when their parents were around. They never caused trouble when adults were watching. At least, not the kind of trouble that gets noticed. I'd taken care of them many times before. Movie nights, early dinners, bedtime stories they didn't really listen to, normal stuff. That night started the same way. Their parents left around 7, kissed them goodbye, reminded them to behave, and told me they'd be back before midnight. The door closed, the car pulled away, the house went quiet, that kind of quiet that settles fast and stays. The girls went upstairs without saying much. No running, no laughing, just footsteps. Then a door closing at the end of the hall. I stayed downstairs, giving them space. Kids their age liked pretending they were older. I let it happen. It made things easier. Time passed. I checked my phone, scrolled without reading, listened to the fridge hum. When I got close to 8, I went upstairs to tell them dinner was ready. I knocked once, no answer. I knocked again harder, still nothing. I opened the door. Their room was empty. Beds untouched, window closed, closet door open but nothing missing, shoes still by the wall, jackets still on the hook behind the door. It didn't look like kids sneaking out. It looked like they had never been there. I went through the rest of the house, bathroom, guest room, laundry room. I checked under beds, behind curtains, even places that made no sense. I called their names, first calm, then louder. My voice echoed in the hallway and came back empty. That was when I heard the front door. Not opening, closing. Before I moved, I stood still in the hallway. I needed to be sure. Sounds can play tricks when you're alone in a quiet house. I waited, counting seconds in my head, listening for footsteps or voices. Nothing came, just the low buzz of the lights. I ran downstairs and pulled the door open. The street was empty, lit by yellow lamps spaced too far apart. At the end of the block, near the small park, I saw movement. 2 small figures running, one slightly behind the other. I stepped outside and called their names. My voice carried farther than I expected. The figures didn't stop, they ran faster. I followed them, shoes slapping against the sidewalk. The park was just a patch of grass, a broken swing set, and a bench with peeling paint. No one was there at that hour. No cars passing, no windows facing it directly. I slowed down as I got closer. Kids don't run like that unless they're scared or playing. This wasn't play. Their shoulders were tense, heads turned back every few steps. They weren't checking for me. They were checking behind me. I called out again, telling them to stop, telling them they were in trouble, telling them their parents would be angry. They didn't slow down. Harper grabbed Leela's hand and pulled her harder, almost dragging her across the grass. I walked faster, not running now, letting them hear my steps, letting them know I was close. I focused on Harper. She was older, stronger, and faster. Leela stumbled more. If I grabbed one, the other would stop. Kids don't leave their siblings behind. They freeze. They always do. I closed the distance step by step. I didn't yell anymore. I asked questions instead. Asked why they were running. Asked what they thought they were doing. Asked who told them to act like this. My voice stayed even. Calm works better than shouting. Harper looked back again. Her face was tight, eyes wide, mouth open like she wanted to scream but didn't dare. She tripped over a patch of uneven dirt and nearly fell. That was enough. I lunged forward and grabbed her arm. My fingers closed tight around her forearm, just below the elbow. She screamed then, high and sharp. Leela stopped and turned, crying, frozen in place. I squeezed harder. Not enough to break anything, enough to hurt. I told Harper to call her sister back. Told her to say it loud. Told her to tell Leela to come closer. She shook her head, crying, trying to pull away. I leaned down and spoke right next to her ear, telling her exactly what would happen if she didn't listen. Slowly, between sobs, she called Leela's name. Leela took a step toward us, then another. She was shaking so hard she could barely stand. That's when I stopped pretending. I let go of Harper's arm and grabbed both of them by the hair, one hand in each fist. I dragged them back toward the house, their feet scraping against the ground, their cries breaking into short gasps. I told them to shut up. I told them neighbors were listening. Inside the house, I slammed the door shut and locked it. I pushed them into the living room and told them to sit. They didn't move fast enough, so I shoved them down myself. Harper tried to get up. I kicked the back of her leg and she fell again. I went to the closet by the stairs and pulled out the wooden stick I kept there. It wasn't hidden well, it didn't need to be. No one ever looked. I held it up so they could see it clearly. I told them I knew everything, that I always knew. I told them their fear wasn't new and neither was mine. I explained how easy it was to make kids quiet, how easy it was to make them behave. I told them they deserved it for trying to run, for thinking they could leave without permission. They ran. Harper pulled Leela up and they bolted toward the kitchen. I swung the stick and hit the wall, splintering the wood. I swung again and knocked over a chair. I didn't hit them, I wanted them moving. I wanted them scared. They slipped on the floor near the back door and barely got it open. I swung once more and hit the doorframe, cracking it. They escaped into the yard, screaming now, not caring who heard. I stood there breathing hard, laughing under my breath. I told myself I'd deal with the neighbors later. Kids lie all the time. Adults don't listen. I didn't go after them. There was no need. I knew where they'd go. Somewhere safe, somewhere loud. I put the stick back in the closet and cleaned what I could. Fixed my hair, changed my shirt. By the time the parents came home, the house looked mostly fine. The police came the next day. They didn't rush in, they knocked. Calm, professional. They asked me to sit down. They asked simple questions. They told me other parents had talked to their kids, that stories matched, that dates lined up. I listened, I nodded. I didn't deny much. There was no point. The charges weren't heavy. Emotional harm is hard to prove. Bruises fade. Kids exaggerate. That's what the system thinks. I was taken away without handcuffs, with no drama, no shouting, just paperwork and quiet disappointment. I didn't get much time. A short sentence, mandatory therapy, a record that followed me everywhere. I'll never babysit again. Not legally. Not in that town. I was 20 and needed money. Mark and Elaine contacted me to babysit their 18-year-old son for one night. I hesitated. 18 wasn't a kid. They said it was fine and asked me to come the same evening. Their house was at the edge of town. Clean and quiet. Mark opened the door. Elaine stood behind him, watching me closely. They didn't explain much. They introduced me to their son, Lucas. He was tall but thin and looked younger than 18. He didn't speak. He barely moved. He looked at me once and then looked down. I told them I wasn't trained to care for someone with special needs. Elaine answered immediately. She said they trusted me. Mark nodded. The conversation ended there. They said they would be home late. Before leaving, Elaine told me not to go into the basement. She smiled when she said it. After they left, Lucas sat on the couch, hands on his knees, staring at the TV while it was off. I asked if he was hungry. No response. I went to the kitchen and made food. When I came back, he was watching me. He didn't look away. I put the plate in front of him. He hesitated, then he ate fast. When he finished, he wiped his hands on his pants and kept staring. I checked my phone. No signal. Lucas stood up and walked down the hallway. I followed at a distance. He stopped at a closed door and pressed his forehead against it. That was the first moment I thought about leaving. I stayed because nothing had happened yet. I tried to redirect him back to the living room. He resisted, pulling away with more strength than I expected. His grip was weak but frantic. His nails scratched my wrist. Before anything else happened, there was a pause, a long one. The house felt sealed. No outside noise, no passing cars. Lucas stood still, breathing through his nose, eyes wet. I remember thinking that whatever was about to happen had already started, even if no one moved. Lucas suddenly ran at me. Not fast, not skilled, just straight at my chest. He slammed into me and we both hit the floor. His hands went for my shoulders, pushing down hard. I yelled his name. He didn't react. His face twisted, not angry, but desperate. He tried to make a sound and couldn't. I kicked and twisted, trying to get free. He was lighter than me, but didn't let go. His fingers dug into my arms. His mouth opened wide like he was trying to scream. Nothing came out. Tears ran down his face, hitting my shirt. I managed to roll us over and scrambled backward. He crawled after me, swiping at my legs, trying to grab. He didn't hit my face. He didn't aim well. It was all panic and pressure. I realized he wasn't trying to hurt me the way I first thought. I stood up and backed away, and he stayed on the floor, shaking. I approached slowly. He tried to scare me, jerking forward, baring his teeth. It didn't work. His body language didn't match the act. He looked broken. I knelt and reached for his chin before I could talk myself out of it. He resisted at first, then stopped. I pulled his mouth open. There was no tongue. I fell back hard, my head hitting the wall. My stomach turned. Lucas covered his mouth and sobbed without sound. He pulled his gloves off next. His fingers were swollen, bent wrong, nails cracked and black. Some looked crushed flat. Before anything else happened, there was another pause, longer than the first. The kind that stretches until your body starts shaking on its own. I knew we were being watched. I didn't know how. I didn't want to look. I told him we had to leave. I pointed to the door. He shook his head hard and looked up. His eyes went to the corner of the ceiling. I followed his gaze. A small camera stared back at us. I stood up fast. That's when the door behind us opened. Mark stepped in, calm, already mid-motion. His fist hit my jaw. I didn't see it coming. My legs folded and the floor rushed up. I came to on cold concrete. My hands were tied, my head rang. Mark stood over me with a hammer. Elaine was nearby, hitting Lucas with open hands, screaming without raising her voice. She called him a traitor. She called him ungrateful. Before the next thing happened, my body locked up. Not frozen, just slow. I couldn't feel my fingers. The hammer came down on my left hand. Once, twice. Each hit was clear and exact. No rush, no anger. I screamed until my throat burned. The pain was sharp and clean. It didn't fade. Mark worked finger by finger. He didn't look at my face. Elaine dragged Lucas away, still yelling. I tried to pull free. The rope cut into my wrists. Before I lost track of time, there was movement behind Mark. Fast and sudden. Another boy slammed into him from the side, younger than Lucas. Same empty look, same damaged hands. They crashed into shelves and fell. Mark recovered quick. He punched the boy in the stomach, then the head. The kid dropped. I saw more figures in the room. 5, maybe 6. All thin, all injured, all watching. Mark turned back to me. He raised the hammer again. I kicked out and caught his knee. It wasn't strong, but it surprised him. He stumbled, the rope loosened, I pulled my hands free, skin tearing, and I ran. My legs barely worked. Elaine met me at the stairs. She grabbed my hair. I shoved her with everything I had. She hit the railing and fell sideways. I didn't wait. I burst out the front door and kept running. I didn't scream. I didn't look back. A police car passed at the end of the block. I waved and collapsed in the street. The police moved fast. I stayed in the car, shaking while they went in. I heard shouting. I heard cuffs. Mark and Elaine were dragged out fighting. Lucas was carried, limp but alive. In the weeks that followed, details came out slow. They had used babysitting as cover. Different towns, different victims. They kept them hidden. They controlled them. They watched everything. They said they chose me because I lived alone, because no one would notice fast. They said it like it was nothing. My hand never healed right. I still wake up at night feeling pressure on my fingers. I don't babysit anymore. Lucas survived. So did the others. Some couldn't speak. Some couldn't stand being touched. None of them ever talked about the basement. The house was emptied, cameras removed, walls torn open. People said it looked normal from the outside. That's what scares me the most. I didn't save anyone. I just ran at the right time and got incredibly lucky.